promoting the U.S. Department of Ministries. The case of convicted pedophile Epstein, who, according to the official version, committed suicide in an American prison, threatens to bury the careers of dozens, if not hundreds, of global politicians, including both former and current presidents, prime ministers, and members of royal families. And this whole story, first and foremost, is very sordid. It reeks of Russian spirit. Yes, the Russian intelligence connection in this case looks like a more than highly plausible and obvious version. And the Western press outlets have in fact already dubbed it a honey trap. KGB honey trap. This is indeed the situation. This is a well-established expression used to describe intelligence operations involving women or men who are deployed as romantic agents to gather compromising material on the specific target of recruitment. These targets are most often influential politicians, high-ranking military personnel, or prominent journalists. In short, people from high society. And this whole story clearly points us directly to the Kremlin and its various intelligence services. The Western press is already openly writing about this situation. The British newspaper The Telegraph directly. The report points out that the notorious American financier Jeffrey Epstein, in whose private residence it has already been clearly proven that at least 40 innocent underage girls were subjected to horrific abuse, may have had long-standing and stable ties with various Russian intelligence services. In particular, a significant new letter recently published by the U.S. Department of Justice includes, among many other things, specific emails in which more than 1,000 times the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is mentioned, as well as people from his inner circle and many Russian politicians. And among them, one is especially noteworthy and not public. Sergei Belyakov, a distinguished graduate of the FSB Academy, who in the year 2012 to 2014 was relatively inconspicuous and quiet. He was the Deputy Minister of Economic Development of the Russian Federation. Epstein complains to him about a certain Russian girl who, after sexual encounters occurring in Epstein's own private residences, she decided to blackmail, as he writes, several prominent and influential businessmen in New York. This is bad for the business of everyone involved. Proposals are being directed to him. Epstein makes it very clear that he expects a definite solution to the problem with this Russian woman. In this case, it is also mentioned that while communicating with her, Epstein threatened her with retaliation from the Russian Federal Security Service and in the Latin version of the text, he uses the phrase enemy of the people. That is exactly what it was called during the 20th century, according to the formal draft letter he prepared. Furthermore, a huge number of these files also contain many unflattering factual details regarding the work of Russian and unfortunately also Ukrainian modeling agencies, among which in particular the latter is mentioned, one of the most famous and prominent agencies in Ukraine, Line 12. Another agency, L Models, is also mentioned, though in this case there is no evidence. In the specific case of Line 12 and its permanent head, Masha Manyuk, who, by the way, personally engaged in a series of written correspondences with one of Jeffrey Epstein's primary business partners, the complex issue of, among other things, sending young Ukrainian models to the USA is extensively discussed. This partner's name is Jean-Luc Brunel, a notorious French modeling scout, and this specific correspondence dates all the way back to the year 2010. Masha Manyuk herself later denied all these facts in communication with journalists and stated that she has nothing to do with it. With the Epstein case, well, it would be strange if she admitted it. That's definitely not the kind of fame that a woman from the show business world craves. Everyone understands perfectly well that show business has a notoriously dark side, but very few of the founders and owners of these agencies would ever want to be associated with the world of escort services and VIP prostitution, and that's precisely the scenario that could be unfolding right now. Moreover, the Telegraph has published detailed reports regarding a meeting that never took place, which was originally planned to include Jeffrey Epstein and dictator Putin back in 2014. A Japanese businessman was also supposed to participate in this meeting. However, the meeting did not happen because a deeply tragic event occurred. A Russian-made Bukem missile system shot down the Malaysian Boeing aircraft. In the tragic crash caused by the Russian military, more than 300 innocent passengers and crew members died. Crew Yet another prominent former politician, about whom there had previously been a significant number of serious suspicions that he might have been actively recruited or perhaps otherwise covertly influenced by Russian intelligence services, is also mentioned in these files. We are talking about the former Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Thorbjörn Jagland. Jeffrey Epstein specifically discusses his name in correspondence from the year 2017. Let me remind you, Singe, Jagland behaved, let's put it this way, in a way that was not entirely unambiguous in the case of the Russian Federation, particularly when the important issue of excluding Russia from the Council of Europe member states was being discussed. Well, now, as a matter of fact, the question arises, the most important thing is that Jeffrey Epstein could have been also involved in a campaign to discredit and compromise many influential American politicians and businessmen. And he could have acted, among other things, on the orders of Russian intelligence services. Well, in fact, this brings up the question of who ultimately was responsible for getting rid of him. And it could very well have been the Russian intelligence services. Nevertheless, in the dossier that was published, the names of dozens of victims were mistakenly included and made public, although initially I assume that all of them were supposed to be concealed. In particular, the Wall Street Journal has reported that by a significant mistake, the names of 43 of Epstein's victims were not removed or redacted from the official dossier. These specific names can now be easily found, including through their personal email addresses and their fully unredacted first and last names. And now, a second round of redaction will take place for these same dossiers, just as was done previously when, among other things, photos and videos were removed, including those involving the current President of the United States. Who else appears on these official public lists besides those individuals already mentioned? Yes, of course, former President Donald Trump is frequently mentioned, including records of his at least 8 documented flights aboard Jeffrey Epstein's notorious private jet. Elon Musk, the richest businessman in the world. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, the brother of King Charles III of the United Kingdom, who is also under a legal investigation and has been officially called to testify by the current British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Bill Gates, the famous co-founder of the Microsoft Corporation. Here there is an entirely unverified and controversial claim made by Epstein himself, who sent himself emails alleging that Gates had a venereal disease, which he reportedly tried to cure with Epstein's direct help by giving secret medical treatments, which were apparently antibiotics, to his own wife, Melinda Gates. Also, besides Princess Mette-Marit of Norway, who is currently involved in a major scandal as well, there is Richard Branson, the famous founder of Virgin Group, a figure in show business, and even prominent figures in contemporary American politics. In particular, the current U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Howard. Ludnick, who had previously lied about having severed all ties with Epstein in 2005, was actually making arrangements through email correspondence in 2012 to travel with his family to Epstein's private island for the Christmas holidays. Among the Russian figures, aside from Putin, an interesting one is Maria Drokova, the former press secretary of the Kremlin youth movement, Nashi, who, according to several sources, personally engaged in sexual relations with people from Epstein's circle. And of course, she did this not for free, but with a very particular and deliberate purpose, carrying out assignments from the Russian special services. At the very least, relevant hints have already been published in the press. Moreover, this is indicated by the fact that in one of his letters, Epstein asked Drokova to send him her nude photographs. Russian opposition figure Ilya Ponomarev is also mentioned, though here he is referenced purely in a political context. One of Epstein's long-term business partners, the prominent venture investor Boris Nikolic, calls Ponomarev the main Russian opposition figure, stating that sooner or later he will become the president of Russia, unless, of course, he is killed first. Another key figure was the now deceased Vitaly Chulkin, a high-ranking Russian diplomat who corresponded extensively with Epstein in the year 2016. He even helped him with various matters during that time. Churkin sought to secure a professional position for his son Maxim. It is such a fascinating and noteworthy detail. Well, and the Russian businessman Umar Zabrailov, Vladislav Doronin. In short, the game of musical chairs is now beginning. Musical chairs, when the participants move in a circle and there's always one less chair than people The one who doesn't sit down in time is out. And then another chair is taken away, someone else is out, and so on until the end, until only two are left. Two participants with one chair. And so it is finally beginning. The high stakes game of musical chairs, where every single participant tries to eliminate all their competitors and pray that their own name doesn't come up, all in connection with this controversial scandal. However, it seems that Epstein's dossier is relentless and it will keep pulling more and more people into its vortex. New and new names of the super influential, politicians included. I'll repeat once again, since the Russian connection has already come up. There will be a lot of interesting things here related to current Russian entrepreneurs and politicians.